Imagine coming home and finding your yard devastated. All the trees you planted, cared for, and watched grow, mercilessly uprooted. I've seen a lot of absurd things working as a ranger. People camping in forbidden places. A couple trying to baptize their child in a lake full of alligators. A tourist thinking it was a great idea to feed a bear a ham and cheese sandwich. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found on my way home that day. The shock came before I even got out of the car. As soon as I parked in the garage, I realized that something was wrong. Very wrong. My yard, once surrounded by tall trees that I planted myself years ago, was completely devastated. In place of the majestic walnut and oak trees that shaded my plot, there was only a war scene. The trunks lay cut on the ground, branches scattered like amputated limbs, the strong smell of sap mixed with fresh sawdust in the air. I got out of the car without even bothering to close the door. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't exhaustion from the day's work. It was anger, an anger so deep that it seemed to heat my blood, pulsing deep in my chest. I walked slowly, my feet sinking into the loose earth where my trees used to be, as if I were stepping over a freshly dug grave. What the fuck happened here? I muttered to myself, my voice coming out lower than I had intended. And then, in the middle of that botanical crime scene, I saw something that made my breath stop for a second. Nailed to one of the stumps with a shiny silver nail was a laminated notice, printed on white paper, with the dreaded HOA logo at the top. Oh, right. It had to be her doing. I pulled hard on the paper, almost tearing the plastic in the process. The bold title made me want to claw my own eyes out. Notification of landscape restructuring. Compulsory adaptation. The text below explained, in an incredibly condescending manner, that, in order to maintain the aesthetic uniformity of the community and ensure a pleasant look for all residents, the trees on my property had been removed. The HOA claimed that my vegetation was excessively tall and out of line with the neighborhood pattern. And then, right at the end of the notice, the icing on the cake, the final blow. Invoice for services, $8,450. Due date, 15 days after notification. I read it at least 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating with rage. It wasn't enough that this woman had had my trees destroyed. She still had the nerve to charge me for it, as if she were doing me a favor. My hands were shaking as I crumpled up that damn paper. My trees, the very ones I planted with my own hands, that grew up with me, that were part of the local ecosystem, were cut down because some damn HOA decided they didn't fit with the neighborhood. My eyes scanned the yard, trying to find some logical explanation, something that would make me believe that this was a nightmare, that I was going to wake up and discover that it was all just a paranoid outburst. But no, the reality was quite clear. My property had been attacked, and the enemy was wearing a floral dress and a smile of superiority. Because I already knew exactly who was behind it. Her, the woman who patrols the neighborhood like a damned watchdog, always holding a clipboard like a badge. The same creature who already sent me a $150 fine because my car was slightly out of alignment in the driveway. The same one who drove past my house 2 months ago, wrinkling his nose and saying that my trees were a danger to the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Well, now she's got what she wanted, but what this woman didn't know was that she didn't just mess with any resident. She messed with someone who has a deep understanding of environmental law and who has the power to turn her life into a legal hell. I took a deep breath and pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. If she thought she was going to get away with this, she was sorely mistaken. I scrolled through my contacts and found exactly who I needed. An old friend. An environmental inspector, someone who took the preservation of trees as seriously as I did. As the phone rang, I could already imagine her smile crumbling the moment she realized what a colossal fuck-up she had just made. The phone answered on the 3rd call. "Speak up, man." The voice on the other end answered with a nonchalant tone. "I need a favor." I answered, my voice cold and controlled, even though inside I wanted to scream. A woman in the neighborhood decided to play logger on my property. Without permission, she cut down protected native trees. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a second before I answered, "What did she do?" "Exactly what you heard. I need you to tell me how far I can take this to court." My friend let out a low whistle. "Man, depending on what's been cut, that could lead to a federal fine. You want to screw this woman?" I gave a cold smile, looking at the wreckage of what used to be my yard. "I want a lot more than that." And with that silent promise, I hung up the phone. That woman didn't know it, but she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and I was going to make sure that she felt every consequence on her skin. I spent the whole night staring at my devastated yard, trying to absorb the level of idiocy I was facing. Trees that had taken years to grow, some even decades, simply uprooted as if they were useless scrub, as if nature existed only to suit the taste of this woman's damn suburban aesthetic. The HOA, in theory, existed to keep order in the neighborhood, to ensure that no one painted their house neon purple or parked a car without wheels on the front lawn. But this woman, she had an unhealthy obsession with control. It was as if every house, every leaf, every bit of land had to pass her seal of approval. And when something wasn't harmonious enough, well, it seems she thought she could just have it torn down. But what she clearly didn't know was that cutting down native trees without permission isn't just a lack of environmental education. It's a crime. Real crime. An expensive crime. And I was going to make sure that every penny of that bill fell straight into her lap. First thing in the morning, I began my offensive. First, I contacted the Department of Environmental Conservation. I explained the situation, described the trees that had been cut down, and casually mentioned that some of them were protected by state and federal laws. The attendant's reaction was exactly what I expected. "Sir, this is very serious. Do you have proof?" I laughed dryly. "Photos, videos, an official HOA notice nailed to the trunk of a felled tree, and a bill charging me for the destruction." The man on the other end of the line took a deep breath, as if he needed a second to process the level of stupidity I was describing. "We'll send an agent to investigate." Perfect. But that was only the beginning. The second call was to a lawyer specializing in environmental and private property disputes. Because if this woman thought I was just going to send her a letter of complaint, she was in for a bigger shock to reality than a bolt of lightning striking her electric fence. The lawyer listened to everything with the professional patience of someone who has dealt with many barbarities in the business. When I'd finished, he let out a long sigh. "Well, if what you're saying is confirmed, the HOA could be sued not only for property damage, but also for violating environmental laws. Depending on the species of trees cut down, we could be talking about fines of tens of thousands of dollars." "That's great. I want to sue for every last penny." He agreed, asked me to send him all the evidence I had, and assured me that he would start preparing the case immediately. Now there was only one thing left: the confrontation. I could wait for justice to take its course. But you know what? I needed to see this woman's face. I needed to look into her eyes and see the exact expression of horror when she realized what a monumental fuck-up she had made. So I picked up the crumpled HOA notification, opened the cell phone app to record it, and went to her house. I didn't even have to knock on the door. She was already outside, pruning a bush as if she were a Renaissance art sculptor, with her usual smug smile. The kind of smile you see on someone who spends her days giving orders and expecting the world to obey. As soon as she saw me approaching, she crossed her arms and tilted her head in surprise. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I lifted the notification paper and waved it in the air. "Just to confirm, did you have all the trees on my property cut down?" She didn't blink, nor did she hesitate. "Yes, of course. They were compromising the visual harmony of the neighborhood." Her calm was almost funny. "Almost. Compromising the harmony?" "Yes," she said, with the confidence of someone who thinks she's absolutely right. They were unnecessarily tall and clashed with the rest of the landscape. In addition, some leaves were falling onto the sidewalk, and this could be dangerous for the residents. I had to close my eyes for a second to keep from laughing nervously. "So, to sum up," I said slowly, "you had private property destroyed, you cut down trees protected by law, and now you want me to pay for it?" She made an impatient gesture, as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "It's not a question of payment. It's a question of respect for the community. You need to understand that you can't just do whatever you want with your land." Ah, the irony. I took a step closer, keeping my voice cool. "Well, I hope you like bureaucracy, because you're going to have to deal with a lot of it over the next few months. I've already contacted the Department of Environmental Conservation. I've also called in a lawyer, and from what I've been told, the fine for cutting down protected trees can reach tens of thousands of dollars." She blinked, her smile fading a little. "I'm sorry. What?" "You heard right. Cutting down trees without permission isn't just inconvenient, it's illegal. And now, you're not only going to pay every penny of that destruction, you're also going to face a hefty lawsuit." Her tone changed on the spot. "This is absurd. I'm the president of the HOA. I have the authority to make decisions for the good of the community. You have authority over who signed the HOA contract. I didn't sign anything." Her eyes widened. "Ah, so she finally realized. You can't do that." "I can, and I have. And do you want to know the best part?" I crossed my arms, feeling the pure satisfaction of seeing someone fall from their arrogance. "If any of these trees are on the list of protected species, you could even face criminal charges." Her face went as white as a ghost. She tried to say something else, but I was already turning to leave. I'd already gotten what I wanted. Now, all I had to do was sit back and watch as reality came to crush her. And if there's one thing I've learned in my profession, it's that nature always takes its toll. Only this time, the price would come in the form of fines, lawsuits, and a lot of heartache for that woman. They say that revenge is a dish best eaten cold. But in my case, it was a plate full of bureaucracy, environmental regulations, and a lawyer bent on turning that woman's life into a legal hell. And believe me, every second was worth it. The day after my little chat with the head of the HOA, the movement began. The staff from the Department of Environmental Conservation showed up early, armed with clipboards, cameras, and a look on their faces. They were the kind of team that had seen it all, from illegal logging to crazy people trying to create a clandestine plantation in the middle of their backyard. But even they didn't seem prepared for the stupidity they found there. The first thing they did was measure the trunks and take samples. Because, as I already knew, some of the trees that had been uprooted were protected by law. But seeing the inspectors confirming this with their own mouths was more satisfying than anything else. Because now it was no longer just my word. Now it was official. One of the inspectors, an older guy with a faded cap and an experienced look, let out a long sigh as he wrote down his notes. "This is going to cost a lot." Oh yes, I knew that. While they worked, I stayed close by, watching their every move. Not that I needed to supervise, I trusted them, but I wanted to be there when this bomb really went off, and the explosion came quickly. The HOA received a formal warning the same afternoon, a detailed report with all the infractions committed, accompanied by a notification that they were being investigated for destroying native vegetation without permission. And even better, a preliminary fine was already being imposed. $15,000. Yes, that's right, $15,000. Just as an initial figure, while the investigation continued. Because, depending on what else was discovered, the figure could rise. But honestly, that wasn't even the best part. It was seeing that woman's face when she received the notification. I was sitting on my balcony, pretending to check some emails, when I saw one of the inspectors handing over the envelope at the HOA door. Her confident look crumbled as soon as she opened the paper. First, a frown. Then her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She tried to argue. Of course she tried. She gestured, pointed at the documents, waved her arms as if she was about to summon some spirit that would make the inspectors change their minds. But it was no use. The government doesn't care about your title as president of the HOA. They only care about numbers, laws, and the right paperwork. And the paperwork was all against her. After the inspector's visit, the real free fall began. First came the internal commotion. The HOA staff, those knuckle-draggers who normally followed her every order without question, were now afraid. Because HOAs love control, but they don't love paying exorbitant fines. And this wasn't just any bill. It was a hole in the budget. The HOA, which loved to send letters and ridiculous charges to neighbors for things like grass too high or wrong color of fence, was now desperately trying to find a way to save itself. And the reaction of the other residents? Ah, that was the icing on the cake. The gossip spread faster than fire in a dry forest. Within hours, everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. Some were shocked, others outraged, but most found it hilarious. For once, that woman was not in control. The final blow came 2 days later. The lawyer I'd hired had everything ready, and he wasn't interested in friendly negotiations. We filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA and against her personally. Property damage, illegal destruction of private property, violation of environmental laws. And the best part? Since the HOA was the one who hired the removal services, they were equally responsible. This meant that the other members of the HOA were also in trouble. And, of course, no one likes to be in trouble because of someone else. Within days, the internal division in the HOA was visible. Some people began to question her leadership. Others wanted to get rid of the mess before it got any worse. Because if there's one thing upper-middle-class neighbors hate more than substandard fences, it's having to dip into their pockets to pay for a mistake that wasn't even theirs. The meetings began to heat up, and I just watched. I sat comfortably in my backyard, sipping my coffee as I saw the first signs of a riot against that woman. And you know what? Coffee never tasted so good. The end was near. She just didn't know it yet. The final collapse of the HOA queen was a beautiful thing to watch. I've seen storms destroy trees, forest fires consume entire acres of vegetation, but I've never seen anything as devastating as a group of angry residents realizing that the woman who ran their lives had gotten them into a monumental mess. In the days following the fine and the lawsuit, the neighborhood became a veritable battlefield. If before the HOA was feared, and no one dared to challenge the rules it imposed, now it was different. What began as whispers turned into heated conversations. And then came the meetings. Ah, the meetings. The first one was called hastily, probably in an attempt to do some damage control. The HOA hall was packed. It was a mixture of fear, anger, and despair. They were about to take a huge financial hit, and all because of that woman's brilliant ideas. I didn't go, of course. I didn't need to. My job was already done. But one of my neighbors, a guy named Mark, who always hated the HOA but never had the guts to stand up to them, sent me detailed messages about everything that was going on. At first, she tried to hold it together. She walked into the meeting with her nose held high, holding a stack of papers as if she had some secret card up her sleeve. She tried to convince the council members that it wasn't her fault, that everything was done for the good of the community. But then someone asked about the fine, and that's when things fell apart. So you're saying that we got fined $15,000 because you decided on your own that someone's yard wasn't up to neighborhood standards? The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw, the same one she used to destroy my trees. She started stammering, making excuses. She said it was a collective decision. She said it was in the HOA documents. It wasn't. She said everything could be resolved easily. It couldn't. The only thing she didn't say was what everyone there already knew. She was screwed. Over the next few days, the collapse of the HOA was inevitable. News of the fine spread, And what was once blind fear of the rules began to turn into revolt. Some people began to contest old fines they had received. One neighbor who had been forced to repaint his fence because of an inappropriate shade of beige showed up with a stack of receipts demanding a refund. Another, who had been fined for putting up a Christmas decoration after the permitted deadline, wanted an explanation of where all the money from the fees was going. It was like watching a dam cracking and finally giving in to the pressure. And the final crack? The second blow I was expecting. The lawyer I hired wasn't just interested in getting compensation for me. He made a point of going through everything: the HOA bylaws, the finances, the decisions made in recent years, and it didn't take him long to find some irregularities. Let's just say that this woman wasn't exactly careful with her paperwork. Money that should have been used for common area maintenance simply disappeared. Contracts for services never carried out were signed by companies that, coincidentally, were known to her. And the fees that residents paid? A good portion was going to administrative expenses that no one could explain. As soon as this came to light, the HOA imploded for good. The board met again, this time without her. An emergency vote was taken and, by an overwhelming majority, the woman was stripped of the presidency. The new board wasted no time. First, they got rid of her for good, expelled from the HOA, banned from any future involvement. Then they began to renegotiate all outstanding fines and lawsuits. And finally, they decided on something beautiful to hear: the total dissolution of the HOA. That's right, they decided to end the damn organization. And, mind you, it wasn't just a decision made in the heat of the moment. They called in lawyers, reviewed the laws, and followed all the procedures to ensure that the HOA would cease to exist. It was like cutting off the head of a snake to make sure it would never come back. And what about her? Well, that woman who walked around like she was the queen of the universe was now completely ruined. Not only had she lost her precious position as president of the HOA, but she was also sunk in debt. The environmental fine couldn't simply be ignored. The lawsuit I filed? Neither. And the money she embezzled from the HOA? The board made sure she was criminally investigated for that. The last time I saw her was a few weeks later, while she was putting some boxes in her car. She was moving. To where? I don't know, and, honestly, I don't care. But the irony is that, even in her last attempt to maintain a modicum of dignity, she couldn't hide the look of defeat. The neighborhood was now at peace. No ridiculous fines, no absurd control, no one prowling around the houses like a fifth-rate policewoman. People started talking to each other more. Some even started planting new trees, a kind of collective middle finger to her legacy. As for me, well, my lawsuit made good money, enough to renovate the yard, plant new trees, and ensure that I never have to deal with another HOA in my life. And the next time someone tries to destroy my property, may God have mercy, because I won't. And if you liked this video, don't forget to comment and leave your like to help the channel. See you later.